It was the summer of 1979. Six college friends from Billings packed their gear, loaded a rusty Chevy van, and headed toward Montana's Stillwater Range. They weren't thrill seekers or reckless drifters, just students chasing one last weekend before graduation. The plan was simple: 2 nights by a mountain lake that rarely saw visitors. The air was thin, the trails narrow, and the map warned no maintained access beyond mile 12. They laughed at that. Young people always do. By dusk, they had crossed the last bridge and parked beside a stand of pines. The forest smelled of rain and sap. Someone turned on a small transistor radio. It hissed between songs. They set up 3 tents in a triangle facing the lake, built a fire, and cooked beans straight from the can. Voices overlapped with easy confidence. Plans for jobs, promises to stay in touch. One of them, Daniel Kerr, joked that they should leave a time capsule. He scribbled their names on a napkin and buried it beneath a stone by the fire. The others laughed. None of them knew it would become the last trace they ever left. As the night deepened, the forest grew quiet. Wind moved through the trees with a sound like breathing. At around 11 p.m., a storm rolled over the ridge. Rain hit the tents in waves. Thunder echoed across the valley. Inside the nylon walls, flashlights flickered and went dark. And then, nothing. When Monday came, the group's families expected a call that never arrived. By Tuesday morning, local rangers were alerted. Search teams moved out on horseback, tracing the narrow path up toward the lake. They found the van first, doors locked, keys inside, sleeping bags missing. Footprints led part way into the woods, then vanished in a patch of mud washed clean by rain. No scattered supplies, no food wrappers, no drag marks, just silence. The campsite itself looked frozen mid-moment. The fire pit was cold, ashes neatly contained. One tent lay half collapsed, its entrance zipped. Inside were dry clothes, notebooks, and a camera still loaded with film. On a nearby tree branch hung a single sleeve of a flannel shirt, torn clean away, threads caught in the bark as if yanked by force or by wind. Investigators spread out in widening circles. Helicopters swept the slopes, and divers searched the lake. Dogs picked up nothing. Weather reports showed heavy lightning that weekend, but no landslides, no flash floods. The forest had simply swallowed 6 people whole. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Headlines called it the Stillwater Mystery. Reporters arrived, filmed the camp, interviewed weeping parents and tired rangers. Theories formed and faded: bear attack, storm panic, group accident, or worse. But the evidence refused to cooperate. No blood, no tracks, no bodies. Weeks became months. The case file grew thick with witness statements that led nowhere. A fisherman who thought he saw flashlights at dawn, a hunter who heard distant shouting, a pilot who spotted something white on a ridge that turned out to be snow. By winter, the search had exhausted its budget. Families built small memorials near the lake, wooden crosses, photos sealed under glass. Each year, the snow buried them a little deeper. Locals told stories to keep the legend alive. Campers spoke of hearing voices at night, of seeing 6 faint lights moving between the trees before fading into mist. The rangers dismissed it as imagination, but few volunteered for night patrol after dark. Decades slipped by. The forest reclaimed the trail. Fallen logs blocked the old road. The van rusted in a storage yard behind the ranger station, evidence from a case nobody could close. Children grew up hearing warnings: don't hike past Stillwater Lake. The woods there don't give back what they take. Then, in the spring of 2017, a storm unlike any in years tore through the range. Hillsides crumbled, creeks overflowed, and trees fell like matchsticks. When the rain stopped, rangers began clearing debris from an unused service path near the same lake. The ground there looked wrong, raised in perfect mounds, arranged in a pattern too neat to be natural. One ranger knelt, brushed aside mud, and felt fabric, heavy canvas, stitched tight, sealed under clay. He called for backup. Within hours, the area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Reporters arrived again, older now, with new cameras and the same questions. The site lay just 100 yards from where the six friends had camped 38 years earlier. Whatever was buried beneath those mounds had survived 4 decades of storms and silence. As crews prepared to excavate, the wind picked up across the lake, rippling the surface into dark mirrors. The forest stood still as if holding its breath. For nearly 4 decades, nothing else was found, until a storm uncovered what the forest had been hiding. 38 years after the Stillwater disappearance, the forest had gone quiet again. Trails once used by families were now overgrown, swallowed by brush and moss. Few people hiked that far anymore. But in early spring 2017, a maintenance crew was sent to inspect a narrow service path for erosion damage after a major storm. Among them was Ranger Claire Duval, 32, methodical, calm, the kind of ranger who measured rainfall by memory and could identify birds by their echo. She'd grown up hearing the Stillwater legend. To her, it was just another old campfire story. Until that morning. The rain had left the ground soft and heavy, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet clay. Claire's boots sank with every step as she followed the crew uphill. Half a mile in, she noticed something odd. Small ridges in the soil, too symmetrical to be random. 3 shallow mounds in a straight line, then another 3 behind them, forming a perfect hexagon. She crouched and brushed the dirt aside with her glove. The soil beneath wasn't loose. It had been packed by hand, the texture different from the surrounding earth. She called another ranger over. They probed deeper, and the tip of the shovel hit something hard. The sound was hollow. Claire knelt again and saw fabric, canvas, old but intact, sealed under a crust of clay. At first, she thought it was just buried trash from old campers, but when more of it appeared, zippers, poles, and metal hooks, she froze. The pattern wasn't random. Someone had buried full-size tents. She radioed for backup. Within an hour, the area was taped off and the forest echoed with the low hum of generators and camera flashes. Mud stuck to gloves. The smell of damp nylon and rust filled the air. Every layer of soil they lifted released decades of trapped scent, wet leaves, cold metal, faint traces of something chemical. By dusk, the first tent had been exposed entirely. Its fabric, though faded, was astonishingly well preserved. A cracked plastic lantern hung inside, its battery still corroded in place. Next to it sat a small cooking pot, blackened at the bottom. A sleeping bag lay rolled tight, as if waiting for its owner. The campfire circle nearby was different. It wasn't charred wood. It was a ring of stones deliberately filled with concrete, sealing whatever had once burned there. Claire stood in silence, rain dripping from her hat brim, trying to take it all in. This wasn't debris. It wasn't a landslide accident. Someone had sealed this campsite on purpose. She called her supervisor at the ranger station. Within hours, state investigators arrived. 2 SUVs full of forensic technicians in white suits. They worked through the night under floodlights, labeling each item, taking photos, collecting soil samples. Every movement was cautious. Every breath felt heavy with realization. Word spread fast. A hiker posted blurry phone photos on social media before rangers could stop him. By the next morning, Stillwater tents was trending across Montana. Local news vans lined the access road, reporters repeating the same question. Had they finally found the missing six? The official statement came later that day. Possible evidence related to a 1979 missing persons case has been discovered in the Stillwater Range. The site remains under active investigation. No further details, but off camera, the team had already uncovered more. Each tent was buried the same way, flattened, folded inward, then sealed under dense soil and a resin-like coating. A forensic chemist scraped a sample. It tested positive for polymer traces not commonly used until the late 1980s, meaning the burial happened years after the campers vanished. Claire kept noticing tiny details others missed. All six tents faced the same direction, east toward the rising sun. Inside one, she found a coffee mug with initials etched by hand. D.K. Daniel Kerr, the group's leader from 1979. That night, as the crew packed up, Claire walked back alone to double-check the perimeter. The floodlights flickered in the mist, making shadows dance across the mounds. For a moment, she thought she saw footprints beside the excavation, fresh ones, but when she shone her light, they were gone, washed smooth by drizzle. Back at base, she logged her report word for word. Under initial assessment, she hesitated before typing. Unnatural preservation of campsite. Possible deliberate concealment. 2 days later, the forensic results came in. There was no organic decomposition, no trace of human remains, no animal disturbance. Every object had been sealed as if meant to survive, decades untouched. Even the air trapped inside the tents carried faint residue of formaldehyde, a preservation chemical. Investigators widened the dig and found a second layer below, fragments of wooden stakes and what looked like numbered tags, each marked 1 through 6. No one could explain why someone would bury tents like that, nor how the site stayed hidden so precisely. When questioned by the media, the park superintendent gave a cautious answer. We can't yet determine whether this was an accident, a cover-up, or something else entirely. But inside the forensic tent, Claire said what everyone was thinking. Looking at the neat alignment, the resin, the identical layers of dirt, she whispered, "This isn't where they died. It's where someone wanted them remembered." Her supervisor frowned. "You think it's a memorial?" She shook her head. "No. A memorial tells a story. This one hides it." Over the next week, samples were sent to the state crime lab, and the dig site was fenced off with steel panels. The trail leading to Stillwater Lake was officially closed until further notice. Reporters speculated everything from cult rituals to government experiments, but the rangers knew it was something stranger. Everything about the site felt intentional yet emotionless, like a project completed and abandoned. One morning, as Claire returned for follow-up inspection, fog hung low over the clearing. Water dripped from branches, forming slow ripples and puddles around the sealed tents. The soil shimmered with minerals, a faint chemical sheen glowing under pale light. She stood at the center of the mounds, notebook in hand, realizing the truth that none of the press releases could say aloud. Whatever had been buried here wasn't meant to decay. It was meant to wait. It wasn't a burial site. It was a time capsule, built by someone who wanted it found. Before the Stillwater discovery became headlines again, the names of the missing campers had almost faded from memory. The case file labeled them simply as the Stillwater Six, but each one of them had a story. 6 real people, not a legend. Daniel Kerr, 24, the organizer, a geology student from the University of Montana, level-headed, precise, the kind of person who color-coded his camping lists. Friends said Daniel loved order. He measured tent stakes before hammering them in. His parents remembered his last words before the trip. "We'll be back Sunday before dark. Don't worry, Mom." Lauren Price, 22, Daniel's girlfriend, a photography major who carried her Polaroid everywhere. Her friends said she saw beauty in things others ignored: cracks in rocks, shadows between trees. In the recovered film, one of her last photos showed Daniel crouched beside the lake, smiling, half blinded by sun glare. Eric Dalton, 25, the talker, the mood breaker, and part-time musician. He brought a small tape recorder to capture forest sounds for his band back home. Investigators later found fragments of his cassettes in the recovered tents. Most were damaged, but one remained playable. Faint laughter, guitar strumming, and then a female voice. "Turn that off, Eric, it's late." The tape clicked and ended there. Sophie McLean, 23, quiet, thoughtful, the group's navigator. She'd grown up hiking with her father and was the only one who could read a compass properly. Her recovered notebook survived almost perfectly sealed inside a tin box. Most pages were sketches of plants and landmarks, but one stood out. At the bottom of a page, in small, hurried letters, she wrote, "Day 2, saw tracks by the ridge, not sure if deer." Jason Lee, 24, mechanical engineer, restless and curious. He built makeshift gear for the group: lantern brackets, waterproof containers, a tripod out of scrap metal. The others called him the Fixer. His sister said he was fascinated by puzzles, always taking things apart to see how they worked. That curiosity, she said, probably got him looking into something he shouldn't have. Emily Hart, 21, the youngest, the heart of the group, a nursing student with an easy laugh and a fear of lightning. In letters to her roommate before the trip, she wrote, "If it storms, I'm hiding in Jason's tent. He promised not to tease me." That same tent would later be found sealed shut, the zipper stitched from the outside. Each of them had packed carefully, matching backpacks, ration kits, identical climbing ropes, and one emergency flare per tent. It wasn't a reckless trip. It was planned like a field study. That's what made their disappearance so hard to understand. Detectives revisiting the 1979 reports found the same pattern. Everything about the group's preparation screamed competence. They had backup routes marked in pencil, trail checkpoints, even a designated time for daily radio contact. And still, within 24 hours, 6 educated, experienced adults simply vanished from a flat lakeside clearing. Families kept the hope alive for years. Every time a hiker went missing in the region, someone called asking, could it be them? Every holiday, their parents left porch lights on. When the tents were found in 2017, investigators reopened the family files. Many relatives had grown old. A few had passed away, waiting for answers. Those who remained spoke quietly when reporters came. Daniel's mother, Helen, still kept his textbooks stacked beside his old desk. "They said the forest took him," she told the cameras, but Daniel wasn't careless. "If he's gone, someone made it happen." Lauren's brother couldn't look at the photos from the dig. He only asked one question: did they find her camera? When told they had, but without film inside, he whispered, "Then whoever buried it took the last pictures." From the recovered items, a portrait of that weekend began to form. Normal, happy, uneventful. Lauren's photo roll ended with daylight shots of the lake. Jason's toolkit lay neatly wrapped. Sophie's map marked a route toward the western ridge, where no search team had looked before. Investigators began to realize the most chilling part. Nothing in those tents suggested panic. No signs of struggle. No packed up gear. It looked like they'd stepped out for a moment and never came back. Forensics teams cataloged each tent's contents down to the smallest object: mugs, ropes, notebooks, spare batteries. When Claire Duval compared the lists, something strange emerged. Every tent had identical gear down to the brand and size. Even the ropes, all new, all purchased the same week from a small outdoor supply shop in Billings called Trailhead Outfitters. Claire checked the store's old business registry. The owner, long retired, remembered the sale clearly. 6 of them came in together, he said. Young, polite, bought matching gear, cash payment. They said they wanted uniformity for group safety. But when asked who handled the sale, his face changed. That wasn't me, he said slowly. We had a new clerk that summer. Kid named, I think it was Harris, only worked here a month. Then he disappeared. That single statement turned a 38-year-old mystery into something else. Records showed no tax ID, no driver's license, no trace of that employee ever existing. The store's hiring forms were missing, and his supposed references were fake. Detectives traced what little they could. One partial address led to a P.O. box rented under a different name, Harlan Briggs. The same alias appeared decades later in Ranger Station archives as a reported hermit sighting near Stillwater. Claire stared at the old files, piecing together a realization that sent chills through the room. Someone had been connected to this group before. They ever reached the mountain, the matching ropes, the mirrored equipment, even the careful sealing of the tents. It all hinted at planning far beyond a random tragedy. When she closed the folder that night, her hands trembled slightly. Outside the ranger station window, the forest line stood motionless under a pale moon. She thought about the 6 faces on the evidence board, smiling, carefree, frozen in time. They hadn't just vanished, they'd been chosen. All 6 had bought identical climbing ropes from one shop a week before the trip, sold by a new employee who was never traced. The excavation began 3 days after the discovery. The site, once a quiet clearing, now buzzed with lights, generators, and measured voices. Forensic tents lined the ridge, each marked with a yellow number. Rain still hung in the air, and every step sank into soft clay that released the smell of iron and rot. Ranger Claire Duval stood beside the lead forensic specialist, Dr. Ethan Vale, as he explained the plan. Soil would be removed layer by layer, every inch photographed, tagged, and stored. Each tent was treated like a buried time capsule, untouched since 1979. The work would take weeks. By the first afternoon, they'd already found something strange. The upper 6 inches of soil were fresh, loosened by the recent storm, but below that, the earth was dense, compressed, uniform, unnaturally smooth. Soil cores taken from each mound revealed 2 distinct layers of burial. The lower strata matched late 70s sediment composition, while the upper layer contained trace pollen from pine species not present in the area until the mid-90s. That meant someone had revisited the site at least once, decades after the original disappearance. Claire jotted notes in her field log as Vale lowered a metal probe into the soil. At 10 inches deep, the instrument hit a hard surface. The diggers switched to small brushes. Slowly, square by square, the corner of a tent appeared, canvas gray and stiff, coated in something that glimmered under the floodlights. The material wasn't just dirt covered, it was sealed. A resin-like layer spread across the fabric, thin but deliberate. When the chemist scraped a sample, the smell was sharp and chemical, like solvent mixed with glue. By nightfall, the first tent was fully uncovered. The structure remained intact. the poles rusted but upright. Claire knelt beside the entrance, noting a detail that made her stomach tighten. The zipper had been stitched shut from the outside. Every tooth of the zipper was hand-sewn together using nylon thread, she whispered. Someone didn't want it opened. Dr. Vale replied quietly, or wanted it to stay closed forever. Inside the tent, the air was stale, preserved like the inside of a jar. The contents were oddly neat. Sleeping bag folded, boots aligned toe to toe. Cooking gear nested perfectly. No bones, no hair, no trace of a body ever being there. When the team opened the second tent, they found more personal effects. A Polaroid camera. 3 undeveloped photos, water-stained but legible. In one, a tent stood in sunlight. In another, a shadow crossed the frame. A tall, lean figure just beyond focus. The third photo showed the group smiling by the lake, their last moment caught and forgotten. Other tents revealed the same eerie order. Journals sealed in plastic. Notes dated June 8, 1979. Most were mundane, lists, meal plans, sketches, but one entry, written by Sophie McLean, caught Claire's attention. Tracks again, near camp, too deep for deer. Don't mention it to Daniel yet. It wasn't much, but it was proof of awareness, proof that something had unsettled them before they vanished. Meanwhile, laboratory testing on site confirmed that the sealant coating the tents contained synthetic compounds unknown in 1979. Some polymers matched industrial-grade adhesives developed in the mid-'80s. Whoever buried the tents had access to specialized materials and knew how to use them. Claire recorded her observation in the investigation log. Sealant applied evenly, consistent viscosity, indicates controlled technique, possibly mechanical application. Subject demonstrates engineering or construction background. As days passed, word of the discovery spread beyond Montana. True crime forums flooded with theories: government cover-up, military experiment, cult activity. But locals whispered about something older. An old legend passed quietly between search and rescue teams since the 1980s. They called him the Collector. According to stories, he was a hermit who lived deep in the Stillwater backcountry, cataloging things lost to the mountains, broken tools, lost packs, even animal bones, arranging them in perfect rows. Rangers claimed he had once approached a fire watch tower, asking for inventory sheets, before vanishing into the trees. No one had ever proven he existed. But every year or two, hikers reported strange cairns or piles of old camping gear arranged in patterns, triangles, circles, sometimes hexagons. Claire didn't believe in folklore, but the alignment of the 6 tents matched the exact geometry locals described. A perfect hexagon, each tent facing outward, each sealed with surgical precision. During the second week of excavation, the team began removing soil samples for pollen and spore analysis. Results came back showing mixed layers, some grains dating to 1979, others to 1995 or later, meaning the site had been disturbed twice. Someone had reopened and resealed the burial about 20 years after the campers vanished. Claire stood in the center of the site that evening, watching the floodlights flicker against mist. The resin coating on the tents shimmered faintly under the light, almost oily. Each surface caught reflections like glass, making the mounds appear alive. She spoke softly into her recorder. 2 burial phases confirmed, stitching patterns consistent across all tents. Whoever did this wasn't hiding a crime. They were preserving one. That same night, the excavation reached the lowest layer. Beneath the final tent, technicians found a narrow trench lined with wooden stakes. Each stake was numbered 1 through 6, carved by hand. Next to them lay fragments of thick cable and a small metal tag stamped Property of Forest Service, but the serial number didn't match any known inventory. When Claire asked the archives department to trace the tag, the answer came back blank. The number sequence didn't exist in any government record. It was as if someone had fabricated an official tag to make the site look legitimate. By now, even the most skeptical investigators agreed this was no natural burial. It was a controlled operation, planned, executed, and maintained by someone with technical knowledge and enough patience to revisit the scene decades later. The following morning, Claire met with the lab technician analyzing chemical residues from the sealant. He held up a vial, the liquid inside faintly yellow under the light. "It's not just resin," he said. "There's something else mixed in, something modern." She asked, "Modern like when?" He looked uncertain. "Like within the last 10 years. Claire's pulse quickened. "10 years? Are you sure?" He nodded. "We ran gas chromatography twice. There's a compound used in certain preservation fluids, industrial grade. It wasn't synthesized until 2006. The realization hit her hard. Whoever had revisited this site hadn't just sealed it again. They had used materials only available recently, meaning the person responsible wasn't a ghost from 1979. They were still alive. The forest around the site felt heavier that evening. Wind hissed through the pines, lifting dust from the mounds. Claire looked at the tents, silent, preserved, perfectly arranged, and felt the first cold trace of fear since the investigation began. She whispered to herself, "Someone didn't just bury the past. They've been maintaining it." That faint chemical residue told the truth. The burial wasn't old at all. Whoever sealed those tents had done it using modern preservation fluids. By late summer 2017, word of the Stillwater excavation had reached every diner, gas station, and local radio host in southern Montana. Most people were curious. Some were frightened. But a handful claimed they'd been waiting decades for someone to ask. Ranger Claire Duval and Detective Vale spent their mornings interviewing anyone who had lived near the range in 1979. Retired rangers, loggers, hunters, even a few hikers who'd taken part in the first search. The stories came slow, carried on coffee breath and long pauses. None matched perfectly, but together they painted something deeply unsettling. The first was Warren Mitchell, a retired Forest Service mechanic. His hands shook as he unfolded a map older than Claire. "I remember that summer," he said. "It rained 5 days straight. On the 6th, I saw a ranger truck I didn't recognize. Government green, same as ours, but the emblem was off. Font was wrong, letters too tall. He swore a man climbed out wearing a ranger jacket, but no name tag. When Warren waved, the man only nodded once and walked into the timber carrying a spool of wire and a lantern. He moved like he knew the place," Mitchell said, "but I'd never seen him before or after." The official records showed no patrols in that sector the week the campers vanished. Next came Caleb Rowe, an old hunter who still kept a cabin at the base of Stillwater Ridge. He remembered the same week differently. The quiet. No birds, he said, no wind. Whole forest felt like it was waiting for something. He'd been out checking traps after sunset when he saw a light deep between the trees, steady, moving in a pattern. It wasn't a flashlight, he told them. Too smooth, like somebody swinging a lantern side to side. Slow, measured. Every 20 seconds it turned, like they were marking spots. He thought it was survey work until he realized it was happening miles from any known trail. Claire asked if he'd reported it. Caleb shook his head. Didn't seem my business then, but a week later, The helicopters started flying over. That's when I knew something bad had happened. They met others, a retired search and rescue volunteer who remembered hearing radio interference that week, distorted voices, repeating numbers, a store clerk who said a stranger came in asking for topographic maps but insisted on ones without coordinates printed, and an old woman who swore she'd found neat stacks of stones by the river that disappeared the next morning. Individually, the accounts sounded like folklore. Together, they formed a rhythm, a pattern of observation, movement, and precision that matched the crime scene too closely to ignore. Claire started connecting the testimonies on a corkboard inside the field trailer. Every sighting, every anomaly, every whisper about a ranger who wasn't one. In the middle, she pinned a single note: posing as authority. She didn't believe in coincidences anymore. A week later, heavy rain forced excavation to pause. While crews waited out the weather, Claire and Vale explored the surrounding forest, hoping to locate any remnant of an old ranger structure. Maybe storage sheds or survey posts. Half a mile east of the burial site, they found it. A decayed outpost, half collapsed and nearly swallowed by roots. The roof had caved in, the sign unreadable under moss. But inside, the air was strangely dry, as if something or someone had tried to keep it that way. Under a broken desk, Claire's flashlight caught the glint of glass jars. She pulled one free. The lid was rusted shut, and a strip of masking tape still clung to the side, marked in fading pen, S79, Chow Core 3, 12 inches. There were dozens more, neatly arranged in a crate. Each jar held soil, different shades, labeled with depths and coordinates. Next to them lay rolled topographic maps, their corners stiff with age. Claire unrolled one across a crate lid. Circles were drawn in red ink across the ridge system, 6 of them, evenly spaced in a perfect hexagonal pattern, right where the tents had been found. Dr. Vale stared at the markings. "These aren't survey notes," he said. "They're measurements." Claire ran her finger along the lines. Each circle was dated. The earliest, June 1979. The latest, July 1996. Someone had returned again and again to test the ground that covered the tents. They radioed headquarters for collection gear, then photographed everything. On one shelf, Claire found a metal lunchbox packed with old film canisters. Inside each canister, tiny Polaroid negatives showed fragments of dirt mounds, marker flags, even close-ups of tent fabric textures. Every image had been logged like research: angles, distances, soil type. Whoever took them hadn't been hiding their work, they'd been documenting it. As they sealed the evidence boxes, Vale muttered, "This is more than obsession, it's field study." Claire didn't answer. She was staring at a final jar tucked behind the crate. Unlike the others, it wasn't labeled with coordinates. Only 2 letters, E.H. Emily Hart, the youngest of the missing 6. The jar contained nothing but soil, darker than the rest. She placed it gently in the evidence bag, throat tight. That night, the investigation trailer glowed under halogen light as rain beat the roof. Claire replayed the interviews on her recorder. Each voice bled into the next. Warren Mitchell describing the fake ranger, Caleb Rowe describing the swinging light, the woman talking about the stacked stones. Every account described methodical movement, someone mapping, measuring, testing, not random cruelty. Precision, she whispered into her log. Pattern suggests intelligence testing the environment before and after the incident, consistent with long-term observational behavior. It wasn't the forest haunting the place. It was someone using it like a living laboratory. By morning, the rain had cleared. Forensics hauled the jars, maps, and canisters back to the main tent for cataloging. Claire lingered at the outpost doorway, tracing the grooves where sunlight hit the floorboards. The smell of damp pine filled the air. Somewhere deep in the woods, a crow called once, then fell silent. She thought about what the locals had said: the man in the ranger uniform, the rhythmic lantern, the perfect alignment of the tents. All those stories dismissed as superstition now circled back like a closing snare. The truth felt close enough to touch, yet impossibly far. Whoever orchestrated this had blended into official life, wearing authority like a mask. And he hadn't just taken people, he had studied the land itself. Claire stepped back into the clearing, notebook in hand, and looked toward the 6 mounds gleaming pale beneath the new sun. They weren't random graves. They were data points, measurements, an experiment carved into the earth. Whoever watched those campers didn't just hide them. He studied the ground that would cover them. By early autumn 2017, the investigation had turned from excavation to analysis. The forest was quiet again, but inside the ranger compound, every table was crowded with evidence bags, samples, and maps. Claire Duval barely slept. What began as a simple discovery had evolved into something deliberate, architectural. Dr. Vale spread a series of scaled diagrams across the workbench. Each red dot represented the position of a recovered tent. When connected, they formed a perfect hexagon, each side equal to the inch. Vale adjusted his glasses. It's not random. Whoever placed them understood geometry. Claire nodded slowly. Or symbols. He overlaid a transparencia taken from a 1970s mining survey map of the Stillwater Range. The dots aligned almost exactly with a network of magnetic survey markers installed during mineral testing in 1974. Markers used to measure variations in the Earth's field. The campers' tents had been buried on those same coordinates. Claire stared at the overlapping maps. He didn't just pick a campsite. He used one, a grid that already existed. Vale leaned back. Order, control, precision. Every action calculated, like a ritual. Forensics reports arrived next. DNA swabs from inside each tent confirmed the presence of the 6 known victims, and something more. In Tent 4, technicians found a partial fingerprint preserved in the resin sealant. At first, it matched no one in the national database, but after rerunning it through state archives, a hit surfaced: Harold Briggs, a forest maintenance worker who vanished in 1982. The same name had appeared years earlier in local legends of the collector. Briggs had been known for his obsessive mapping habits. Old employment notes described him as solitary, meticulous, prefers fieldwork over people. He had last been assigned to the Stillwater sector, 3 years after the campers disappeared. Claire read the file twice, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. If Briggs had vanished in 1982, who sealed the site with chemicals from 2006? Someone had continued his work, or he'd never really disappeared. As lab results accumulated, a pattern of 2 timeframes emerged: the original burial in 1979 and a second resealing between 1994 and 2006. Claire began constructing a visual timeline on the evidence board: newspapers, lab dates, folklore reports, all connected by one thin red string labeled Briggs. Her recorder captured the moment she said it aloud. The collector didn't just hide them, he maintained them, controlled when they'd be found. Every clue fit that theme: order, ritual, control. The sealing fluid, the geometry, even the missing journals from each tent suggested selective curation. Whoever did this wanted the story told in his order, not the world's. That week, state authorities approved limited nighttime monitoring of the Stillwater site. Claire's team installed motion sensors and infrared cameras around the 6 mounds. Nothing was expected, it was standard procedure. But after everything they'd seen, none of them felt certain the forest was empty. The first 2 nights were uneventful. Wind, rain, small animals. On the third, just after 2 a.m., one of the sensors tripped. A camera facing the northern mound captured movement. The footage was grainy, tinted green by night vision. Through mist, a solitary figure appeared, tall, lean, carrying something like a lantern. He moved slowly, deliberately, circling the site once. At each tent, he paused and crouched, touching the soil as though checking its condition. Then, without haste, he turned toward the trees and vanished. Total time on screen, 58 seconds. No vehicle approached or left. The motion detectors at the trailhead stayed silent. It was as if the forest had opened, let him in, and closed again. When the team reviewed the footage at dawn, the room went silent. The figure's clothing looked like a ranger uniform, the same outdated design from the late 1970s, but the patch on his sleeve was wrong, the same misprint Warren Mitchell had described decades earlier. Investigators swept the area immediately. No footprints, no tire marks, only faint indentations near one mound, parallel lines consistent with kneeling posture. On the disturbed soil, a small glass shard glinted in the light. It was part of a jar lid, the same kind found in the decayed outpost. Claire held it with gloved fingers. The rusted tape fragment still bore one faint letter, B. That night, she sat alone reviewing all the evidence, the jars, the maps, the resin, the footage. If Briggs had truly been the collector, he hadn't died in 1982. He'd gone deeper underground, living, watching, perfecting. And now he had come back to check his work. She recorded her thoughts softly. The geometry wasn't random. It's an obsession with symmetry, with containment. He believes he's preserving purity, people, time, the forest itself. He doesn't kill for chaos. He kills to organize. The next morning, the lab confirmed something else. Microscopic traces of preservation compound found on the jar fragment matched the same formulation discovered on the tents, a blend that had been refined only a decade earlier. That meant whoever appeared on camera was using fresh material. He hadn't returned once. He'd been returning for years. Claire and Vale briefed the task force. Older rangers exchanged glances. None wanted to admit what the evidence implied. Vale finally said it aloud. He's still alive. Maybe older, maybe slower, but alive. They decided to tighten surveillance, additional cameras, motion alarms, drones at night, but the Stillwater woods were vast, dense, and full of echoes. Even with modern equipment, finding one man who knew every ravine and back trail was nearly impossible. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were already being watched. Every evening as the sun set, the air grew colder, heavier. Wind carried faint metallic smells from the excavation. Resin, old soil, rain. Sometimes she thought she heard movement in the brush, the soft snap of twigs just beyond the line of light. Days blurred together. Reporters demanded updates. Families visited the site. Conspiracy theories multiplied online. Yet Claire's focus narrowed to a single goal: finish mapping Briggs's design. Late one night, she redrew the hexagon from memory. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. Each tent site aligned with magnetic north at exact 60-degree intervals, and at the center of the pattern lay a small hollow on the terrain, barely visible on satellite images. The excavation team had assumed it was a natural depression, but soil scans now showed a dense anomaly 6 feet below, metallic, rectangular, a buried seventh object. The realization froze her. For months, they'd called it the Stillwater Six. What if there had always been a seventh piece, the center of the ritual, the heart of the pattern? She radioed the dig team to prepare for a targeted excavation at dawn. But even as she spoke, another alert pinged on her laptop. Motion detected again. Camera 3, same location, same figure. This time, the man stood motionless facing the lens, his head tilted slightly, almost curious. Then, after 10 long seconds, he stepped closer. The infrared image caught the outline of his face, deep-lined, older, but unmistakably human. He lifted one gloved hand and touched the camera housing. Static filled the feed, then darkness. When the system rebooted minutes later, the clearing was empty. Only one new thing appeared in the frame, a small jar placed neatly at the mound's edge. Inside was soil, tagged with a fresh label written in clean black ink, 2017, Core 7. Claire stared at it through the live feed, heart pounding. The collector hadn't left a message. He'd left proof of life. The Stillwater pattern was complete, 6/10, one center, and the unmistakable sign of a hand still shaping the earth. The collector was alive. The second motion sensor alert changed everything. By dawn, state authorities had sealed the Stillwater site and pushed a small convoy toward the northern ridge, an area reachable only by off-road tracks and logging routes erased from modern maps. Ranger Claire Duval sat in the passenger seat beside Dr. Vale, watching fog peel away from the valley. None of them spoke. The radios crackled with coordinates and fragments of chatter. Possible structure detected. Thermal signature confirmed. At 9:42 a.m., the team reached it. A cabin, or what was left of one, sat half hidden behind a wall of spruce. The roof sagged. The windows were boarded with scavenged planks. Smoke drifted weakly from a metal stovepipe. Claire stepped out first. The air smelled of pine sap and chemical solvent. She drew a slow breath, nodded to the agents behind her, and pushed open the door. Inside, the shack was small, 10 feet by 12, but arranged with surgical precision. Shelves lined the walls, each holding glass jars filled with soil, labeled in identical handwriting, S79, Core 1, 6, 1996, Reseal, 2017, Core 7. Beside them sat rusted chemical drums marked preservative compound, their lids sealed tight with resin. Pinned to the wall above the workbench were sketches of tent layouts, drawn in pencil over survey maps. Every angle measured, every label neat. In the center of the desk lay a single open notebook. The cover read, in block letters, Subjects. The pages were filled with notes written over decades, temperature readings, soil data, short clinical sentences, day 112, integrity stable, moisture variance within expected limits, observation complete, return after thaw. At the back of the shack, in a wooden chair, sat a thin, gray-haired man staring at the floor. His clothes were old Ranger issue, patches frayed, boots cracked with age. He didn't look surprised. Claire stepped closer. "Harold Briggs?" He raised his eyes, calm and pale. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. His voice was soft, steady, like someone greeting overdue guests. The interrogation was brief. Briggs offered no resistance, no confusion. When asked about the tents, he nodded once. "I preserved them," he said simply. "The forest forgets too fast. I fixed that." Dr. Vale tried to keep his tone professional. "You buried 6 people." Briggs looked almost offended. "No, I kept them. Their moment, the way it was, before the noise, before decay. You people dig things up to study them. I sealed them to remember. He described the process as if it were maintenance work, collecting soil cores, applying sealant, recording changes. He spoke about time like it was a disease, and he'd found the cure. They came here full of energy, he said, laughing, moving through the place like tourists. I saw how the ground took their footprints. It was symmetry. I only finished what nature began. When agents asked what had happened in 1979, Briggs hesitated, then smiled faintly. They were never meant to leave, he murmured. The mountains chose their pattern. I only helped it settle. He wouldn't elaborate. No clear confession to murder, no explanation of cause of death. Just the same calm phrases: preserve, maintain, remember. Forensics swept the shack. In a back storage crate, they found preserved journals, each labeled with the victim's initials. Some pages were originals, others were copies meticulously rewritten in Briggs's hand. He had even replicated sketches from the campers' notebooks, redrawn, dated, archived. It was part crime scene, part museum, everything arranged by year, by weather, by soil depth. The man had spent 40 years tending to his creation. When they escorted him outside, the morning light hit his face. He blinked slowly, almost peacefully. "Don't let them rot," he said to Claire. She didn't answer. The investigation that followed lasted months. Briggs's fingerprints matched those on the resin in jars. His DNA appeared on fragments of tent fabric. Every scientific test confirmed what the forest had hidden. He was the collector. But even with a confession of preservation, no human remains were ever found. The tents had been cleaned, sealed, and curated, emptied of life, but not of intention. Without bodies, no official murder charges could stand. Prosecutors built the case around unlawful concealment and tampering, yet Briggs's health declined before trial. He died in custody that winter, leaving behind a line scrawled in his notebook: "Time will bury what you call justice, too." For the families, closure came wrapped in silence. They were given the recovered artifacts, journals, Polaroids, personal trinkets sealed in glass. No graves, no funerals, only items to hold. Daniel Kerr's mother pressed her son's compass to her chest and whispered, "He's home." Lauren Price's brother refused interviews, saying only, "He kept her from the world, and now the world will keep him." Each family carried a different version of grief, some grateful for answers, others angry that there was nothing left to bury. The Stillwater site was officially classified as restricted terrain. Fences went up. The 6 mounds were resealed under supervision, not as memorials, but as evidence. Claire returned one final time before the closure order took effect. The forest was quiet again, sunlight slanting through thin clouds. Grass had started to reclaim the disturbed soil. She walked between the mounds, notebook in hand, tracing the hexagonal pattern that had haunted her for months. Everything looked peaceful, almost ordinary, if you didn't know what lay beneath. Dr. Vale joined her, hands in his coat pockets. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "How calm it looks now." Claire nodded. "He'd like that." They stood there for a long moment. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of resin. Claire set the final stake in the ground: white paint, black letters, restricted areas, federal property. She drove it deep, the sound echoing once through the valley. That evening, the footage from the forest cams was archived. In the last clip before shutdown, the clearing stood empty under moonlight. No movement, no figures, only branches shifting in slow rhythm. Then, as the wind swept across the camera lens, the soil rippled slightly, as if the earth exhaled. The sound that followed was soft, almost like fabric brushing together. Nothing else happened. Weeks later, the site was turned over to long-term monitoring. The story hit national news. Stillwater mystery solved, the collector's legacy. Experts debated motives, mental illness, obsession, a warped sense of science. But no one could explain how Briggs had lived undetected for 40 years, visiting the same clearing, perfecting the same ritual. Claire gave one interview before declining all future requests. She spoke carefully, her voice steady. We look for chaos in crimes like this, but sometimes it's order we should fear, the kind that erases humanity and calls it preservation. After that, she left the ranger service and moved to a quieter district. Yet she admitted, privately, that some nights she still dreamed of the clearing, the perfect symmetry of the tents, the silence that followed, the wind tracing the pattern again and again. The forest keeps what we forget, and sometimes it remembers better than we do.